So Patrick and I have actually coordinated what we're going to be doing today. And I'm going to be talking kind of at the 20,000-foot level. I know there's lots of administrators and leaders and policymakers here, so I'm going to sort of talk about the rationale for the digital humanities in kind of, I hope, a surprising way. And then at the end, we'll be focusing on what's on the blue postcards on all of the chairs. Patrick is going to be talking more specifically about some actual new, what I would call enlarged or expanded or transformed digital humanities programs that he's doing. And then we have an interactive high-tech experiment that's going to be done with machine-made paper and machine-made pencils on the index cards. And it will actually be recorded on a Google Doc that two of Patrick's students from the University of Chicago, where, I'm not sure where you are.
Yeah, keep her back.
There's actually chairs here. They'll be recording on a public Google Doc. So what the message is, if we have ideas, they don't count until we share them. And ideas don't come whole cloth, they come from being inspired by one another. And that's going to be the purpose of the session today. But first, the lofty. Let's begin with a simple thought experiment. Imagine what it meant cognitively and physiologically to be a farmer or a shopkeeper in the early 19th century. Now imagine what it meant cognitively and physiologically to go from farmer to factory worker, from shopkeeper to middle manager. It's a familiar story. It is well known that compulsory public education in the US was largely funded, figured, and rationalized to facilitate and operationalize that transition. Assembly lines, unlike, say, tending crops or cattle, require regulation of the human body to the pace of the machine. Thus, the school bell is a symbol of 19th century public education, and time regulation its chief attribute. Starting and ending each year on time, moving one's educational progress along each grade in timely fashion through graduation, starting and ending each day on time, starting and ending each class period, and therefore each discrete subject or content area on time, and even starting each child on time. Anyone who has had a child or been one knows that some are ready for school at age 5 years and 8 months, some not. The mechanization and standardizing of the child to prepare him for the industrial labor force erased rather than indulged such individual differences. What is less often theorized is the role of higher education in standardizing achievement for the managerial class. Although it is commonplace for would-be educational reformers to say that higher education hasn't changed since the Greek academy, that is wrong. Notably, the period between roughly 1860 and 1925 saw a crisis in confidence around the purpose of the US model of liberal arts education in an industrial world. The transformation to a more business and manufacturing-oriented European system was spearheaded in the US by the 1862 creation of the land-grant university system, in 1876, perhaps most famously, by the founding of America's first Humboldtian industrial-age research university, Johns Hopkins University, and by the systematic upfitting of Ivy League education by Harvard President Charles Eliot, who reigned at Harvard for 50 years, from 1869 to 1909. What is less well known is that Eliot was scarred by his father's loss of the vast family fortune in the Panic of 1857, which he attributed to the naivete and lack of preparation of the American businessman. Inspired in part by Frederick Winslow Taylor's theories of measured and specialized labor productivity, educators of the period devised many of the innovations that we now think of as the traditional apparatus of contemporary higher education. Here's a list. Electives, requirements, general education courses, majors, minors, semesters, divisions, land-grant universities, professional schools, graduate schools, correspondence schools, IQ tests, multiple choice tests, standardized college entrance exams, scholastic aptitude tests, grades, ranking, class rankings, school rankings, productivity metrics, modern statistical analysis, deviation from the norm, tenure, and the two cultures separation of the arts and humanities and interpretive social sciences from the technical and scientific and quantitative sciences. This is but a very small sampling of the many institutional changes to higher education enacted during that period. I begin with this historical sketch because we are once again at a liminal period of educational change prompted by a technological revolution. One might even say that the industrial epoch in which the modern research university was created ended on April 22nd, 1993. That is the day when the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois released the Mosaic 1.0 browser for commercial use. Since then, we have experienced cognitive and physiological disruptions greater than those of the 19th century farmers and shopkeepers. For the first time in human history, anyone with access to the internet now has the ability to communicate any idea instantaneously without an editor to anyone else with an internet connection. That's a tremendous power and a tremendous responsibility that has touched, thanks to mobile technologies, even the poorest of the world's populations in its remotest and least industrialized regions. It has also rearranged labor, financed migration, the nature of work, and the patterns of everyday life and community, every bit as decisively as did the harnessing of steam. 20 years in, higher education is beginning to comprehend its role in rethinking its structures to prepare the post-1993 generation of students for the opportunities and responsibilities of our own information age. Here's my punchline. Our do-it-yourself, anytime, anywhere, unedited, and virtually instantaneous interactive era requires almost the inverse and the opposite of the system of higher education devised roughly between 1860 and 1925 to outfit students for the standardization and mechanization of the industrial age. Our era requires a training in dexterity and diversity, an infinite capacity to adapt to radical, constant, seemingly overnight change, not testable, standardized, measurable outcomes. It requires an ability not only to search and synthesize massive amounts of information independently, but to be able to evaluate it and decide if we trust it. IBM, the inventor of the punch clock, now operates on endeavor-based work where nearly half of its workforce is engaged remotely. How do we train managers to create their own priorities, to collaborate at a distance with people from cultures and languages they do not know, and to control and pace their own time on a 24-hour global workday with infinite possibilities for both constant work and constant distraction, all as small as the device in the palm of one's hand? Transforming education for our age is less about knocking Socrates off his pedestal than knocking a bit of the stuffing out of Frederick Winslow Taylor. So what does that have to do with the digital humanities, the subject of our workshop today? Everything. Digital humanities have been pointing us in a new direction for a good decade now, modeling new interdisciplinary relationships and possibilities for the entire academy, not just for the humanities, for the entire academy. On the cusp of enormous and uncertain change, it is extremely useful to see a successful model of transformation acted out already. Digital humanities are our moments at Johns Hopkins University. I'm serious. And its surprising concatenation of the most unlikely disciplines into a new one, and its combination of high theory, traditional humanistic inquiry, and an exalted amateur maker spirit, the expanded digital humanities exemplify the effrontery and the efficacy of putting the two cultures back together again. And its requirement of collaboration by difference rather than by efficiency, and of public representation and engagement, the expansive version of the digital humanities aspired to a Newtonian recombination of the study, the guild, the studio, the lab, the workbench, the desktop, and the library. What Michael Ondaatje in his 1992 novel, The English Patient, calls thinkering, that form of deep, profound, meditative, creative thinking that occurs when you're doing something with your hands. Digital humanities also replaced 19th century values of solitary genius, hierarchy, peer review, with open access, responsible participation, sharing, collective contribution, and peer-to-peer review. In short, digital humanities provide us with an object lesson and the possibilities for the transformational educational prerequisites necessary in a post-Steve Jobs world. We need positive role models right now. We're being beat up in the media, not just the humanities, but higher education in general. Former New York Times editor Bill Keller, my favorite whipping boy, recently called out our profession's mediocrity, which he attributed to, quote, our cozy, lucrative monopoly. 3 words few of us inside the academy would use to describe a profession now made up of some 70% contingent or adjunct labor. We're being told that we're so incapable of change that we require CEOs and venture capitalists to think big and new on our behalf. Far too much educational change, and it's a trend we must reverse, is happening now from outside, not inside the academy. Nor have most of the changes of which I speak been salutary for civil society. Legislatures incongruously slash public funding to education right when more, not less, investment in public education is crucial. Venture capitalists are clamoring to MOOCs and other ways of technologizing existing modes of education, but it is not clear if they are motivated by a desire to promote future learning or to increase short-term profits. Higher education today needs serious transformation, and that innovation should be led by the most serious stakeholders in higher education, namely students, first of all, professors, and academic administrators and academic leaders. I'm not proposing that every college and university go out and create a digital humanities program. That specialized discipline works at some institutions, not at others. What I'm proposing is that every college and university take seriously what it means to prepare students for the world they live in today. Mark Sermon, executive director of Mozilla, has called this digital literacy with a maker spirit. To my mind, that digital literacy is as important in 2014 as reading, writing, and arithmetic. The humanities are indeed the heart of the matter. In our post-1993 era, the humanities can help all of the academy in its transition to the new world we live in now. Kathleen Woodward, director of the Simpson Center for the Humanities at University of Washington, who's in our audience, and one of Haystack's co-founders, has recently argued that given the complexity and rapidity of change in our world, quote, we are all now non-traditional learners now. Nobel Prize-winning economist Amartya Sen has said that as educators and humanists, we need to view all education as vocational training, in the sense that it is our chief duty as educators to prepare our students for the vocation of leading better, more socially engaged, responsible, and fulfilling lives in the world that is their future. The humanities in which digital literacies are central can help guide all of higher education to that goal. Patrick will be talking about some programs that right now provide us with models of this transformed education. In the conversation period at the end of our brief presentations, we'll be engaging in some interactive exercises with those index cards and pencils to jumpstart a conversation along the same lines. For now, I want to draw your attention to the postcards on your chair and invite you to participate in a project that Haystack is leading this semester called Future Ed. To date, over 70 individuals and institutions have signed on to what is a massive collaborative thought experiment designed to spark new ideas for education for the world we live in now. Haystack has built 3 wiki tools to which anyone can contribute. One for collecting and compiling the best resources on change in higher education, books, articles, URLs, videos. One for innovations in digital literacy with a maker spirit that people have carried out in their classrooms, and another for offering models of successful institutional transformation. The point is that good ideas do not only come from CEOs and venture capitalists. I'll end with just a few words about my own adaptation of Future Ed initiative, and because it's crowdsourced and because Haystack is an open network, now 12,000 members. Anyone can join, you become a leader by doing something. So this is just my version of what I'm doing for Future Ed. I'm teaching a graduate class on the history and future of higher education to 16 undergraduate and graduate students from Duke, the University of North Carolina, and North Carolina State University. Most are earning certificates in teaching. We'll be meeting at the same time as 2 other classes on the same topic taught by Chris Newfield at UC Santa Barbara and David Palumbo-Liu at Stanford. We have developed a group on Haystack where our students can collaborate and communicate with one another across institutions. We'll be hosting 4 public Google Hangouts where our students will lead the conversation with the general public about the importance of higher education in the contemporary world, and especially the importance of the reformed or transformed humanities. I and my Haystack team also made a very amateurish 6-week MOOC on the history and future of higher education that begins on January 27th on Duke's Coursera platform. I think there's 12,000 students registered so far, and they're from every country you can imagine. It's pretty fascinating to see people registering on the site. My on-site students, my face-to-face students, will work in teams of 2 or 3 each week to be responsible for turning our highly amateurish, video-driven DIY MOOC into a participatory, international, interactive, project-driven, collaborative research project. One group is creating a crowdsourced timeline of world innovations in higher education, basically from the ancient world to the present, but concentrating on the last 100 years. No such timeline for global educational innovation exists. Another is compiling video interviews worldwide, where people ask other people just, who's your favorite teacher and why? And then they're doing a data analysis and visualization based on keywords, values, and concepts to help understand what about educators makes such a difference in our lives. The final project is my favorite one. The students are working in 3 teams to design higher education from scratch. My Duke students will design and put online napkin sketches, 3D models, faculty and student handbooks, new departments, admission and graduation requirements, a recruitment video, and even a t-shirt designed for 3 radically different kinds of higher education, imagined without any industrial age legacies. We'll then have the 20,000 or so online participants modify, remix, and fork these institutions, and we'll keep track of those publicly. This is very cool. The Chronicle of Higher Education has created a website for us, and our Future Ed project will be reported on every week by at least 2 students from around the country, from mid-January to April, updating everybody on what's happening in this collaborative project. They'll serve as our reporters and our ears and eyes. You are all invited to participate, and so are others at your institution. There's a group of 40 deans of students across the country who are watching these MOOCs and then using those to spur their weekly conversations. Leaders from at least a dozen separate universities have told us that they are meeting in special groups at their university. I think the University of Washington is one of them, in fact. A group of some 30 educators are meeting in the McDonald's in Otago, New Zealand, where the bandwidth is good and the conversation lively, and the tweets, I assure you, will be rapid. All of our experiments will be hosted on platforms to which anyone can contribute for free, on Google Docs, GitHub, Rap Genius, and on the Haystack site. We hope you will go back to your own institutions, find colleagues who want to be involved in small or large ways, and be part of the conversation. We want to make some noise from within the Academy. Maybe knock the MOOCs off the front page of the New York Times. We don't know what ideas will come up from all of this Future Ed semester, but I know it will be inspiring. I hope the same is true of the rest of our session. And today, and with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Patrick Jagoda.
So Cathy offered a really great big picture, and I'm going to zoom in and give a few examples of the kinds of things that are happening with digital humanities and new media studies. One imperative shared by many subfields of the digital humanities and new media studies is what's called practice-based research, which foregrounds building and making. And building, for many of these scholars, is not an alternative to critique or thinking. Making instead is a way to defamiliarize, test, develop, and transform concepts. So one area that this kind of work has been commonplace in for a long time is the sciences, right? And it's already practiced through the lab model in particular. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit is the potential for the humanities lab model to transform the ways that we think about research design and pedagogy. So I'm going to start with 3 different examples that many of you probably are familiar with. One really well-known one is the Stanford Literary Lab, which was started by Matt Jockers and Franco Moretti. And this lab uses quantitative research methods to study literary texts. So we could call this a digital humanities lab. One of their projects uses social network analysis to study networks of ancient Greek and Roman plays, for instance. Their projects include collaborations among faculty and grad students, but in some cases also inter-university collaborations. Another model is something closer to new media studies lab. One example of this is the Maker Lab in the Humanities at the University of Victoria. And this was a lab that was opened in 2012 by Gentry Sayers. And the Maker Lab intersects with cultural criticism, computation, and comparative media studies. And participants are able to build projects that explore knowing and doing through programming, markup, data modeling, 3D printing, speculative design, prototyping, and new media production. So one example recently is that they were studying and modding 1970s game consoles, bringing together technologists and people doing the history of technology to actually make games and study the platforms on which they were created. A third model that I find kind of interesting is a temporary lab model that emerges for, say, 6 months or 2 years or 3 years in order to address a particular issue. So a really good example of this is the Haiti lab at Duke University. And this was a humanities lab that was started in 2010, just after the 2010 Haiti earthquake. And the lab brought together research, education, and practical priorities to contribute to Haiti's disaster recovery and to expand Haitian studies at the same time. So the lab promoted language study both in Haiti and the United States, and offered a wide range of courses from 2010 to 2013. They also had a number of projects. So one of their projects was the Haitian Voodoo Archive that produced an online library of songs, images, videos, and text that were widely available. Another project that they had was a map of the history of cholera outbreaks in Haiti that was created collaboratively between faculty and students. So those are three different models, and for the next few minutes I'll talk about a case study that I'm more familiar with, one of my digital projects that we started at the University of Chicago called the Game Changer Chicago Design Lab. And I'll draw some general conclusions from that example. So I co-founded this lab at the University of Chicago, not with another scholar in the humanities, but with Melissa Gilliam, who's an OBGYN doctor and a public health professor. Our lab uses digital storytelling, computer games, and emerging new media forms to explore social and emotional health issues, social justice, and civic responsibility with youth on the south side of Chicago. And we're working primarily with urban youth of color between the ages of 14 and 20. Really quickly, why are we focusing on games in the humanities? One reason is it's an extremely popular medium that's attractive to youth and faculty alike. So digital games were a $56 billion industry in 2010. They're predicted to be about $70 billion by 2015. In 2010, there was a statistic that said that there were 183 million active gamers in the United States alone. This was people who are playing games for 13 hours a week or more. Just crazy, but true. I mean, I'm one of those people, or I aspire to be one of those people, and I'm a little too busy these days. But so another example is, Grand Theft Auto 5 came out in September 2013 and grossed $1 billion in 3 days, breaking every entertainment and kind of cultural sales record before. So we're turning to this form because it is of major cultural importance in our time. Also, a great deal of academic attention has started to turn to games. So in literature, right, scholars study the narrative and aesthetics of games as they do with novels or theatrical productions. In visual studies or ethnomusicology, there's a turn to the graphics and music of games. In media studies and game studies, there's a focus on the interface and game mechanics. In anthropology, there's a turn to player communities. In game design departments at places like USC, Carnegie Mellon, DePaul, Georgia Tech, there's a focus on innovative game design. Ditto for education and thinking about game-based learning techniques. So what I'm stressing essentially is games are an unbelievably multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary area that's a really great experimental space for thinking about how a humanities lab might work. So Game Changer in particular, all of our projects are collaborative. They bring together university faculty, they bring together game designers that we've hired to work in the lab, as well as graduate and undergraduate students, two of whom are here today. We have local high school youth, we have visiting artists and designers, and we have community organizations coming to the table. We also have scholars not just from the humanities, but also the sciences, the social sciences, and the arts joining our work. And all of these people are part of the work at the design phase, the development phase, the playtesting phase, but also dissemination, the research studies that we're working on right now, evaluation and grant writing, about which I'll say a little bit more in a moment. The lab's projects run a really broad range. I'll just give you a few examples. In 2011, for instance, we created a web-based graphic novel about the emotional dimensions of teen pregnancy. More recently, we created a sexuality education curriculum called Life Changer that we've tested in 8th grade classrooms that incorporates storytelling, role-playing, and game-based methods. We're creating a card game about the social effects of sexually transmitted infections. We have a board game suite about economic and epidemiological issues in Chicago. We have a decision-making video game that we're working on. One of the bigger things that we did recently was a 5-week alternate reality game called The Source that was played by 140 high school youth. And the game unfolded in both online and offline spaces. It was conveyed through transmedia means, so the story came through webisodes, tweets, Facebook posts, text messages, voicemails, all of which were co-developed in the lab. The game was played by teams of 10 players, was overseen by undergraduate and graduate students who served as mentors for these youth. And the game spoke to a number of social justice issues. So some of the themes were sustainability, health policy, immigration, and homophobia. So topics that are very relevant to the humanities, to cultural studies. We also tried to develop literacies in STEAM fields, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Finally, we offered weekly workshops in 21st century literacies, including web design, podcasting, video production, social media, and blog writing. So areas that were drawing directly from the humanities, but applying them to more recent technological fields. So now just to finish off, I want to generalize a little bit and talk about 7 benefits that I found that this lab model has. Some of them apply specifically to Game Changer, but I think many of them apply just as much to the Digital Humanities Lab or the PhD lab in digital knowledge that you all have at Duke. So number 1, labs enable us to explore the affordances of design as a research method in the humanities. So recently, a number of digital humanities scholars have approached design not merely as decoration or craft technique, but as an intellectual method of thinking through practice. So with game design in particular, processes of play testing and iterating become critical to seeing how a game works in practice through rule execution and social interaction. And Game Changer also uses techniques of transmedia design that invite many different people to the table, right? So somebody may come as a writer, somebody may have an analytical or theoretical background, somebody may have visual or audio background, and they can all kind of contribute to what we're working on. We're also trying to think of design not just as an art, not just as a performance form, but as a way of performing inquiry, research, and educational interventions. Number 2, humanities labs enable flexibility around the form of a project rather than something larger than like a curriculum or a discipline. And this speaks to something that you were saying, Cathy. So labs can take on projects that last 6 months or 2 years. They can address problems that might not require a complete curricular transformation, right? The goal is not for every university to have a digital humanities major or program. Number 3, humanities labs promote collaboration as a key organizational technique for the humanities. So many of our projects at Game Changer are huge in scale, right? There's no way that the source, the summer game, could have been feasible for a single person or even a group of 3 or 4 people, right? It included daily logistics for 140 players, game design, transmedia storytelling, administering surveys, analyzing data, really required a very, very large team of people. So in the humanities, historically, many of us are accustomed to independent work, right? That often culminates in a publication, often several years after initial conception. That's great. That's not something that we should let go of, but collaboration offers something additional that's really important, which is an opportunity for live exchange, debate, and a level of energy that otherwise is limited to classrooms. And for graduate students in particular, their classroom engagement is often limited to the first 2 years of their program. So labs offer a way of extending that energy beyond the first couple of years. The lab model also makes possible collaborative publications. So I've recently, as an example, brought on one of my grad students onto a publication that Melissa Gilliam and I are leading. This gives me a chance to teach him how to write an article, which is something that we don't always talk to graduate students about in great detail. And it also allows him to contribute substantively and concretely to a publication that he can add to his CV when he's heading on the job market. We've done the same thing, bringing on, for instance, a comp lit student, a comp lit PhD student who has a chance to practice science writing skills, which is something that she's been really interested in developing. Number 4, labs allow us to involve faculty coming from non-digital fields. So a key problem in the digital humanities right now is the creation of an in-crowd versus an out-crowd. And Cathy and I were having a conversation a few weeks ago about the question of how you involve faculty and students who are not proficient in digital techniques or technologies. And I think a lab is an optimal way of doing this. At Game Changer, we've brought in faculty for particular projects, and these are people who have amazing statistical backgrounds or amazing theoretical capacities, but have never played a video game in their life. So they're able to contribute their knowledge of methods while at the same time learning more about gameplay and game techniques and game culture from high school students or from undergraduate and graduate students. And I see this bidirectional flow of knowledge happening all the time, and seeing these exciting emergent forms of intergenerational mentoring and skills acquisition that happens on the ground. And one also experiences in this setting tacit learning, multimodal communication, and many experimental methods that we couldn't have foreseen up front. Number 5, humanities labs do not need to be walled gardens or closed disciplinary ecosystems. They have the potential to expand the relationship between the humanities and the sciences. So again, in creating the source, we brought humanities-oriented interests in critical thinking and narrative to bear on topics in science and engineering. We hear repeatedly that cultural theory and historical thought are being marginalized in favor of STEM-driven agendas, and that's surely true, and that's something to fight against in really passionate ways. But I don't think this kind of sidelining needs to be the case. So for our projects, we've made sure to give an equal emphasis to game design, storytelling, STEM content, and social justice. Number 6, grant writing and real-world skills. So Melissa Gilliam and I have used the transdisciplinary aspiration of our lab to seek support through a wide range of grants. So our major supporter over the last few years has been the MacArthur Foundation that has helped us with the digital media and learning aspect of our work, but we've also been able to turn to other disciplines and other grant mechanisms. So we've turned, for instance, at the university to a humanities-based organization called the Neubauer Collegium for Culture and Society that supported our humanities-based work. On the science side, we've applied for National Science Foundation grants for the evaluation of our games. On the health side, we've applied to organizations like the Wolford Foundation that focus on sexual and reproductive health, that take up the content side of things. On the social justice side, we've gotten funding from the University of Chicago Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, for instance. So in each of these cases, we've benefited, in fact, from having a diverse staff and a diverse set of faculty. And we've included the researchers, the designers, and even students in the grant writing. So I want to make the argument that at its best, grant writing is actually a kind of intellectual labor, right? I mean, you're formulating your project, you're formulating your research, you're sharing it with a community of scholars, and it's also a great pedagogical opportunity, right? I talk to my grad students all the time about what it means to make a persuasive pitch for a project. I have them practice writing the paragraphs of a grant and talk to them about what this might mean for academic jobs, but also non-academic jobs, right? If they were to go into PR or communications or a number of other alt-act careers, how could grant writing skills help them with that? Finally, number 7, Maker Labs enable the exploration of the relationship between the digital humanities and social justice. So among the critiques of the early digital humanities has been the idea that there's been a limited engagement with social justice issues. And in many cases, digital humanities practitioners have bracketed or ignored issues of race, class, gender, and sexuality that were very central in the cultural studies turn in favor of computational methods or programmatic frameworks. And what we've tried to do at Game Changer, at least, is to address educational and health disparities on the south side of Chicago without ignoring the computational side or without ignoring the programmatic side. And I think a number of other labs have done the same thing with transnational communities. So the Haiti lab is another great example of a project that was extremely timely, but was also producing projects that were taking up real hands-on skills. So I'm going to stop there. Those are just 7 quick advantages that I see to the humanities lab model, but there are many others that we can talk about together.
Quick thing about the Haiti lab, when you mentioned that about the cholera study, CDC used it to come up with its protocol for actually expelling some of the aid workers that were bringing cholera to Haiti for the first time. They denied that that was the case, and we used records that went all the way back to slave ship records to prove that there had never been cholera in Haiti until the present aid workers coming to Haiti. And that allowed a policy that would have normally taken years to be formulated to happen almost overnight. It doesn't mean people didn't die of cholera, but we like to hope that history helped save a few lives in that case. We're going to do an exercise now. You all should have on your chair an index card and a pencil. It's a 3-part exercise. There's some extra ones up here if anyone needs one. It's a 3-part exercise. The first one will take only 90 seconds. It is on that card. We'd like you to write 3 things that are happening at your institution now to help make humanities central to your students' lives. 3 things. Doesn't have to be, just any 3 things you can think of that you're doing at your university now to help make the humanities central to your students' lives. Just take 90 seconds. You only have 2 if there's 4, doesn't matter. Okay, part 2 of the exercise is that we'd like you to turn to somebody, ideally that you didn't come in with, or that you don't know, and read to each other the 6 things, the 3 things on each of your cards, and then in part 3, and circle one that you think is probably the most urgent idea you'd like to share with the whole group in part 3 for a conversation. We're going to use those things you circled. So now find somebody, either you came in with or didn't, it doesn't really matter, but yes, by all means. So circle one you're going to talk about. So before we even talk about what as you circled on your cards, I want you to reflect on the difference between the think part of that assignment and the sharing part. This is an exercise I learned from a 2nd grade teacher that's called Think, Pair, Share. It's phenomenal in the classroom because it helps introverts, because it means everybody has a stake in what they write and they can actually talk. The conversation's not dominated by 2 people. There have been lots of research on seminars where professors say they have 100% conversation in a seminar when it's actually only 20%. We're so desperate for somebody to talk that we ignore the fact that 80% of our students never say a word in our classes, and there's been lots of research on this. So Think, Pair, Share is designed by a 2nd year teacher. It's also used in medical schools to have people take a stake in their ideas before they communicate it. Interestingly, the first time I taught in Japan, I gave my students a quiz, and they did what you all did in the second part of this, and started talking to each other, and I said, "Whoa, you're cheating." And I was teaching at the most prestigious school in Japan, and they were appalled that I thought they were cheating. And I said, no, let's talk about this. In America, if I give my student, if I'm the professor, and I give somebody an assignment, especially if it's timed, they all work silently and alone. Why did you turn to one another? And they said, because from 1st grade on, we're put into Han. And Han is the group, where people are selected for the group for what they can contribute to the group. At that time, no such thing as learning disabilities. If you're great at math, you're in a group with someone who's great at art, who's somebody who's great at geography, starts in 1st grade, and if you're given a test by a teacher, you know you have this amazing posse that you can rely on to come up with a better answer than you could on your own. It's a really different idea. By the 2nd time I taught in Japan at the end of the 90s, that had gone. It was Western. It had gone to the Western idea. But I think it's so great because I've done this now, I think 90 times. I've never, when I've done the think part of this, had anyone in an American audience turn to somebody else and talk. I never say, write silently and alone. I don't have to. This is the industrial age education. We've been very well schooled in our whole lives. You tell someone to do a hard task, you're a teacher, you give them time, they do it silently and alone. So part of what Think, Pair, Share is also to break that habit and to also show how much more exciting it is to work with somebody else. The room, the energy in the room was certainly more, not the nervous energy of writing by yourself, but in terms of the collaboration. So I've done this with the 6,000 teachers in the closing session of the National Association of Independent Schools. You see yourself in this huge jumbotron, like 20 huge jumbotrons in this huge room, and when you do the think part, the room is as silent as a tomb. It's really scary, and then it gets very lively when everybody's sharing. But let's just start our conversation by going around and talking about some of the things that you circled that you thought were really important to share with the group about something you're doing at your institution to make this humanities central to your students' lives. The two wonderful students who volunteered from the University of Chicago are putting this, what you write, on a collective Google Doc. We won't use your names, but we would like you to say your schools and your institution. And if you want your name used, we can put your name on this too. But we'll then, this is public, so this will be something that people can use to think about ideas for their own universities as well.
And feel free to share if you have a device with you. So
yes.
It's a public link.
Yes, so yes, anyone can find this link online to a Google Doc. How many people have used Google Docs for collaboration? Oh my God, you are so much advanced. These are pros. I'm amazed at how many people don't know how to do this and still send emails back and forth with corrected text instead of doing using this very, very useful collaborative tool. Anyone want to start? Patrick, what do you call me?
I'm actually not from an education institution, but from WFMT Radio, which is the arts radio station in Chicago.
Ah.
And we were the home of Studs Turkel for almost 5 decades. So we're in the process of digitizing his entire radio and also audio archive, which is about 7,500 programs, and building an archive very searchable with a lot of scholarly curation, and then in particular the capacity for students or anybody to take excerpts from programs and combine them with their own audio files and create mashups and new audio documentaries of different sorts. So that's a bit of what we're working on right now. So.
That's fantastic. I mean, I'm from Chicago, and Studs is one of my early mentors. Phenomenal human being, and we have a sound lab at Duke. They'll be very interested in what you're doing. That's really great.
Yes, I'm Jonathan Herrick from the University of Pittsburgh, and faced with this question, I realized that something very traditional that I hope will not vanish is one of the ways we respond to the question. We help make the humanities central to the lives of many students by offering degree programs that permit students at all levels to pursue their existing interests.
No, I think that's huge. That's fantastic.
This movement of connected learning that's taking off around the country, I mean, very much in Chicago as well, combines academic areas precisely with interests and kind of social interaction. So I think interests are so key to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm also not from a university. I'm at the Field Museum here in Chicago, and we are very interactive with students from all of the area universities, and sort of this practice-based learning. We have a lot of students are engaged in literally labs in our science and anthropology. So in a way, our institution integrates science and cultural studies together, and we're trying to use that integration towards both training students and all the way from high school through postdoc levels in how to think about the world in this kind of more integrated way. So through these kinds of laboratory and hands-on experiences.
I'm Colleen Boggs. I'm a University of Chicago PhD, and very happy to be back in the Windy City. I'm a professor of English at Dartmouth College, and I also direct the Leisure Humanities Center. And one of the things that I pioneered last year was to have an event that showcased how professors and students were working together on a research assistant model that we have. And I was shocked by some of the student reactions. Several of them came up to me and said, "Oh, I didn't even know that you do research in the humanities, and this is so great." So I actually thought that this was a wonderful thing to inform our students of, but then also really with this model, which I think is a little bit actually borrowed from hearing about the lab model at Duke and at some other institutions, of thinking about different kinds of collaborative relationships, collaborative spaces, and how we can keep generating and creating them, and then also how we can get the message about them out, and really informing then also students and also professors of the range of research that is being done. One of the things I'm always interested in is that very often we go to conferences such as the MLA, we know what people at other institutions are doing, but even also just information sharing with our students and with one another at our own institutions to really foster our own collaborative relationships across those institutions and across some of the boundaries that sometimes arise at institutions.
Can I go back to Jonathan, what you said? Do you mean a student is allowed to shape their own major according to their interest?
That's not what I was referring to. That option does exist, but when the question of making humanities central, one of the ways for a student to centralize a matter is to major in it. And it was something as simple as that I was speaking of, which nonetheless is, of course, an immense opportunity if people want to do that. There are, of course, then the questions of how you get people to want to do that, but it's important to recognize there really are people who are already interested, and the opportunity to do it is.
I'm also from the University of Pittsburgh. I'm Don Balastowski, and I think there's one piece that kind of bears on the question Jonathan just asked, which is a group of our advisors, initiated by an advisor in the English department, have just begun meeting with students and parents at the events that recruit new students and with the events that involve choosing majors to represent the humanities at those events and bring faculty from the humanities departments to those events to speak to what we do. And that's not something that we had done routinely before, so the resources have been there, but it's not necessarily clear to them until we start talking to them and actually put our faces forward what we do and that we're there.
It's so huge, and I was a vice provost at Duke for 8 years of interdisciplinary studies, and my territory was everything that happened across schools. And it was so frustrating to me because sciences do this, engineering does this, social sciences do it. It was really hard to get humanists to be there to actually talk one-on-one with faculty, not with faculty, with parents, about what a major is. And that was just considered part of the job. In the humanities, I'd often get people saying, you're going to add to our workload. That was considered the job in other fields. And they were fields that already were oversubscribed often. And in our fields where there were diminishing numbers, people didn't somehow think it was part of their job responsibilities. I think that's huge. And the parents get it immediately if they see a faculty member saying, your kid's going to graduate learning how to read, write, communicate, and understand other cultures. What field isn't that useful for? And, so I think that's really fabulous. We've also started doing that at Duke, very assertively and aggressively. And I know it's happening at other universities, but somehow it's a culture change for us in the humanities. There is some sort of victimization, entitlement mentality that we don't have to do that and sell ourselves, that we should be central and that we don't have to sell ourselves. Really happy to hear that at Pittsburgh.
I suppose this is a bit of a segue. I'm Paul Manfredi from Pacific Lutheran University, and we were just talking about the simple idea of getting alumni together, which is something that we hadn't done before and have started to do. And one of the core features of that was to talk about people who are out in the work world successfully and then have them come back together. And then from that, we're hoping to sort of stories of real life experience kind of percolate into the on-campus environment and have an impact on our current students. But one of the things that just occurred to me as I was thinking about this, we're a very discipline-focused institution. So actually, when our majors come back, it's possibly the first time that they've ever been in a humanities environment, which is to say that the history major, or the religious studies major, or the languages major didn't realize that he or she was part of the humanities until they get together with this group of people who are now out in the work world. And that's proved to be very powerful.
That's interesting.
Because it's a reframing of their understanding of what they're doing.
That's fascinating. Again, this is now my hat on the National Council for the Humanities.
Yeah.
People often say, what are the humanities? My dad, who's a scientist, was like, you do humanitarian work, right? And I was like, no, it's like literature. Who wouldn't support that? That's what makes life important. It's the word humanities most people don't have an idea from. So it's fascinating that even your alums who were humanities majors thought of themselves as a history major, a literature, a philosophy major. And that's great.
I think one quick response to that, too, is there's an importance to keep alive both multidisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. So multidisciplinarity in the sense of knowing what it means to be a history major, to have those methods, to know what it is that you've learned and how you can contribute those methods to various jobs and various contexts out in the world, while also kind of taking on a kind of transdisciplinarity where you can take on problems that exceed already existing areas of knowledge, right? I mean, problems that can be taken up in labs, for instance, over a few months or a few years, but really having a clear sense of who you are and at a kind of meta level what it is that you're learning.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Lucy Reinhardt. I'm chair of the English department at DePaul University. And it's often pointed out in our general education curriculum, which students in all 10 colleges take a good number of courses. We're on the quarter system, so I think it amounts to, in the end, like 15 courses. And 4 of the 6 domains within which they take these courses are humanities-based. It's philosophy, religious studies, history, and arts and literature. And so that's something that's, that's done structurally in the same way as the majors. But one thing that's been striking me looking at our enrollment figures in upper-level English classes is, especially in a course we offer on literature and social engagement, or creative writing and social engagement, which takes students out into Chicago in various ways, involved in storytelling projects. And it suits their experiential learning requirements, is how many students we're getting who aren't English majors. I mean, there's maybe just 1 or 2 English majors, and we have a very healthy English major program. So I think this does actually give them a taste for a kind of inquiry that in the general education curriculum that they come back to when they have choices later. And then the other thing, just responding to something somebody said earlier, it has often struck me that this term humanities doesn't mean anything to students and to parents and to alumni. And so we started an undergraduate research journal a couple years ago, which publishes in every major in the humanities and social sciences a best of piece of work from a graduating senior that we then use at these various recruitment events or advising events to say, if you choose this field, this is the kind of work that you're going to be doing, because it is so invisible to them for the most part. So that was just another thing that I thought has been useful.
I'm Cathy Woodward. I'm at the University of Washington and direct the Simpson Center for the Humanities. I want to mention we were in partnership together. The Certificate in Public Scholarship, which we offer. Many of us have been talking about undergraduates, and the certificate is for graduate students, for doctoral students in particular, in order to develop the notion that this is something that should be in their portfolio, so to speak. The idea of the practical arts in addition to the theoretical arts and the critical arts. So those 2 things coming together are really, really important for us. And in terms of mechanisms, just as you were talking about the flexibility of a non-curriculum, we have a very flexible curriculum with a lot of 1-credit courses in project management on the one hand, and when Cathy Davidson came out to the University of Washington for 3 days, a 1-credit course with Cathy Davidson, there were 30 people who had signed up. So it's a wonderful way, I think, to inspire people to re-describe what their research is as something which in fact is not service, although service has gotten a bad name. Service is a good thing too, but as something that is more collaborative with other cultural institutions.
Yes. Hi, I'm Gay Stanning, Chicago Humanities Festival. And I assume many of you know, I hope you know, that we videotape almost all of our lectures, performances, everything that is not, that they allow us to do. They don't always allow us to do it because of copyright and so on and so forth, but when we don't have that, so that you can get this online. Our online presence has grown tremendously, and in fact we have almost the same number of people outside the United States that are downloading the programs as we do inside the U.S. And so that has grown tremendously. The second part of that is we're trying to help teachers, because to me that is the fundamental group that we have to get to and make this easy to use for. So we're still working on tying education of particularly high school students with the content that we're producing.
I'm going to throw out an idea that we came up with by accident at the PhD lab this year. Not by accident. We have one requirement of being in the PhD lab is everyone has to make themselves their own WordPress or other kind of website, because professional organizations this year were surveyed about how they find out information about job candidates, and 72% of the people doing interviews across a range of them said they Googled first. And you don't want your stupid Facebook page to come up first. You want what comes up first to be something you have curated. Also, there's a mental exercise like grant writing when you turn your syllabi that for classes you've taken, your work, your essays that you've written, blogs maybe that you've done, teaching philosophy, you've made that onto a public website. So that's what people see first, is your curation of your own academic self. Interestingly, it was kind of a failure until we decided, for many other reasons, that we wanted to make our PhD lab also available to our only MFA program at Duke, which is an MFA in experimental documentary arts. Well, the MFA students are great at design. They could help the PhD students so much, but they're terrible at understanding how to make a professional profile. You have to have been out in the world for 5 years before you can even apply to our program. So these are scrappy artists who know how to make beauty from nothing and know how to be publicly engaged, but do not know about institutional rules. PhD students know from institutional rules, but not so much from the other things. It's been an amazing collaboration, and very much of what you were talking about, Patrick, in terms of having very, very different interests that you share that make both people better in the long run, but also that curation of your own professional self. And there's a group of people at Mary Washington University in Virginia, who actually now offer for, I think it's $12 a year, a web hosting, a server fee for academics that's safe, secure. It's Jim Grooms. Jim Grooms is the person who does this. So if you're doing this, if you have a humanities organization, you want to offer something to your students, you can offer to pay $12 a year to host their website. And it's a really great exercise for students to think about beyond those dreadful cover letters that they all agonize over. And we also have the research on that. People don't spend more than 2 minutes. Literally, 2 minutes is a long time on the cover letter of a job application. So that's another one. I hope we can collect, if you would, let us collect those index cards so that we can record all the ideas.
Didn't write them such a way they could be read.
It's okay. Well, we'll just use what we can use. But we're trying to have as many ideas out there as possible. This is part of this whole Future Ed initiative, to think about what we as humanists already are doing that people can learn from. I certainly have learned from a lot today, and I hope you all have too. And Patrick, do you want to make any concluding remarks?
No, I mean, just if you want to see all these ideas, go to this URL, which again will be publicly available. We'll maybe put it up on another website. But yeah, thank you so much for coming and for sharing your ideas. And thought this session could be as interactive as it was.
Great. Thanks, everyone.